Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scott McKay.
How's it going, gentlemen? Welcome to yet another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. My name is Scott McKay, at Scott McKay on Twitter and Parler, Scott McKay on YouTube, Real Scott McKay on Instagram. The website is mountaintoppodcast.com. And gentlemen, go ahead and sign up for the Facebook group, which, as always, is the Mountaintop Summit. With me today is a friend of mine. We go back a few years now. He's a good guy. He's a real man, if I may say so myself. And he is currently the editor-in-chief of America's first Freedom Magazine. He's also the New York Times best-selling author of The Ultimate Man's Survival Guide, along with other great books, all of which you'll be able to find on my Amazon page. And today, he's returning as a guest to this show to discuss the very timely and, dare I say, mission-critical topic of a real man's approach to fear-mongering, which, you know, let's face it, is going on right now. So, Frank Miniter, welcome back to the show, my friend.
Hey, Scott, man. Good to be back here with you.
Yeah. And, you know, you had something exciting happen a couple weeks ago that I want to get a few thoughts on, because you got a chance to interview the President of the United States in the Oval Office. And I got to tell you something, just having you on the show, I'm going to kind of pat myself on the back for being one person removed from a guy who's an interviewer of the president. So I feel good about that. But hey, you're the freaking man. You got to sit there in the Oval Office and talk to Donald Trump himself. What was that like? Well,
talk about fear-mongering. I had to spend 5 or 6 hours waiting in the press room. You have to get COVID tested and wait. So I was waiting with the journalists. You would recognize a lot of them from those TV interviews you'll see where the press secretary or the president comes out and speaks to them. And so 4 or 5 hours speaking to these guys, and they don't just hate the president. It's a living kind of snarky hatred. So it was interesting to sit through that, and I watched mostly, and I didn't say much. And when I mentioned who I'd worked for, they'd roll their eyes at me a little bit, because I'm a known conservative out there. But I'm an open-minded guy. I was just trying to understand them. That was just fascinating to go through that with them, and then to get walked, which is very close. You go through like 2 doors and up a couple stairs, and you're in the Oval Office. And the president wasn't there yet. I get to stand there for a little while in that incredible historical room and look at the paintings. And Andrew Jackson, Benjamin Franklin is just this incredible bunch of great American heroes on the wall there. And he's standing in front of that it's actually a little desk in the Oval Office until President Trump appeared in the door across the room. And came in. And when a president, I don't know, whoever the president is, it just must happen this way. The air in the room changes. Everyone gets very formal. And we have a seat. And what got me right in the beginning is there was a Secret Service guy who stood in the doorway, and he gave this gesture with his body like, should I stay or go, Mr. President? Do you need me here? And the president looks at me, and he looks at the Secret Service guy, and he goes, no, I think I can handle him. You can go. And I looked at the president and said, yes, Mr. President, I think you could take me. And so that we had a light little laugh before it began. But then he got right to it. And it was a fantastic interview where he speaks very differently in person. It was very quiet. I was actually concerned for a minute whether my recorder was getting everything. It did. He speaks quietly. He looks right at you. And he answers every question. We had just a wonderful conversation.
Well, it sounds fascinating. Where can guys read the fruit of that interview? In article.
It'll be up in October. It'll be up at a1f.com. I'm the editor-in-chief of America's First Freedom, so it'll also be in the magazine. So if you are a member of the National Rifle Association, you'll get it automatically. But otherwise, go to a1f.com, and it's an honest, interesting interview where I was able to ask him whatever I wanted to ask him, and he answered matter-of-factly every time.
What was the most interesting personal item of his in the Oval Office?
There's not a lot that's in there that's personal. It's a very set and a very clean desktop. The one thing on the desk was a desk blotter of the Declaration of Independence. It's one of those old desk blotters you rip off a page when you make a note on it and so on. And he was kind of proud of it. He kind of showed it to me for a second. And we talked about that briefly. So he was proud of the history and stuff that was there, but there's not a lot of personal stuff in that room.
Now, you said you spent lots of time with the press corps, and today's show, once again, is all about a real man's approach to the fear-mongering. I guess the best place to kick off that conversation, Frank, would be, with the media themselves. What's the deal with the media fomenting fear in one moment, and then as we're going through with the news cycle currently, as we record this, then you criticize the president for urging calm and saying don't panic. It just seems like there's fear-mongering about everything driven by the press. And, let's be real. It happens on both sides, okay? The right-leaning press and the left-leaning press both do their share of fear-mongering because it stokes people and it sells. But, they're even fear-mongering over someone trying to urge calm. It's just gotten crazy. What is it about the zeitgeist of this particular moment in history, Frank, that lends itself to driving fear so much?
Well, what I find really interesting, and you're absolutely right, it's the right and the left. The right hated Obama, and now the left hates Trump, and it drives too much. The one thing I wish they would understand is that hatred by itself as an emotion, as a reaction, is just boring. I mean, it empties your mind of all the stuff that should be there. It takes away your intellect. It takes away everything, and you just become a red-faced, angry person. And that what's coming through in the fear-mongering is they're playing a partisan sort of narrative on every issue, and they're pushing things a certain direction. And you're right, it's both sides, depending on who's in that White House. But right now, it's the left pushing that. And it's visceral, it's right there, and it's just boring. If they just had some manly humor, if they just stand back, look at the facts, laugh a little bit about what's really going on, and then dig in, but honest questions. I mean, they don't ask a lot of honest questions right now. They ask gotcha questions of Trump, or they ask softballs to Biden. Either way, ask some honest question with some humor, a little love in your heart. I mean, that doesn't hurt. Kind of manly strength to have that there, but just a little bit of humor looking at the thing. And that would bring people in, viewers and readers would come in because you just sense that it's there and you're amused. It also opens up your intellect. It calms you down. It allows you to be manly, whether you're a man or a woman. It allows you to have that strength to ask the right thing and to garner that audience. I think a lot of the media just doesn't grasp. That's why they're losing so much of the American public right now.
Yeah, fear-mongering doesn't leave much room for a sense of humor, does it? I mean, that would kind of ruin the whole vibe. That would kill their mojo, wouldn't it? Anybody who's trying to drive hate. Can't do it.
It's the same way with a guy when he wants to meet a certain girl. If he walks up and he's just so strident, it's going to make her nervous. She's going to pull back. She's not going to stand there and take that. But if you have a little bit, especially a self-deprecating sense of humor, just a little bit, it's warm, it's endearing, it's engaging, it's intelligent. They respond to that wonderfully.
I talk to guys all the time, Frank, about this concept of warm levity. Guys take themselves so seriously and they feel so disrespected if someone talks down to them, or they've been rejected if they don't exactly succeed at getting a woman to go out with them the first time they ever talk to them. And yet, just what the world needs nowadays is someone to help everybody else lighten the hell up. And it's manly to lead. We know that. That's a dead horse that doesn't need to be flogged around here. But this idea of just lightening up and showing a little warmth is like catnip to women, and indeed is such a disruptive force right now at this particular moment in history that it just disarms people. And, take, for example, something we talked about a couple shows ago, the timing of the release of the third Bill and Ted movie. I mean, that is a light, silly, fun, inherently optimistic movie. Okay. And I would dare say, Frank, that movie's done more to unite Americans than anyone who's a politician or any brand of politics will ever do for a long time.
I hope so. I haven't seen that yet. I'm looking forward to it. I remember the old ones quite well, which of course dates me. So I don't know about the new generation, whether they're even going to know about the original Bill and Ted's. But so it is good.
Oh, they haven't changed. The movie's exactly what you expect it will be.
But Keanu Reeves is the man. If he can still go back and play that role, wow, what a range as an actor.
Yeah.
Well, watching him in the Wick movies and then seeing the training he did on YouTube, the 3-gun style training where he's switching between pistol, rifle, shotgun, and just knocking targets down, it was amazing. And I've talked to some of the trainers who have worked with him, and they tell me that he could actually go and compete in tournaments with professional 3-gun shooters and probably beat them, or at least rank right up with them. He'd have their respect anyway. So if he could play that role and switch over and do Bill and Ted again, wow.
Well, being an actor in first-run movies is serious business, man. I mean, you got to put in the effort.
So many of them can't do that, though.
Well, I mean, my favorite story, this is a bit of an aside, but my favorite story on that front is how Brad Pitt literally knocked out his teeth. He chipped his teeth on purpose, for real, to play Tyler Durden in Fight Club, which I think is awesome. And then he got him.
I didn't know he did that. Wow.
Oh, yeah. Crazy. You know, a guy known for his stunning good looks as a man chipped his own front teeth on purpose just to play a role. Awesome. You know.
No, he won me Legends of the Fall.
Oh, yeah. I mean, as an actor, he's been fantastic in everything he's ever been. A few minutes ago, you made an interesting juxtaposition, Frank. In the same paragraph, you used the word fear and hate. And we've talked about on this show several times how the opposite of love is fear. You know, that's something a lot of metaphysical types like to talk about, but there really is some truth to it. And yet, so many people automatically assume, and perhaps may even believe, and of course be able to defend their position, that the opposite of love is hate. When in reality, if you look at how some of the worst shadows of human behavior and thought work, they really descend from fear. Take racism or even sexism, right? Someone else is different. I don't understand them. And because I don't understand them, I fear them. And then when I fear them, I hate them because they represent a threat. They're going to hurt me. And two ideas I want to float with you, Frank, just to hear you riff on them, is first of all, fear is not comfortable. It's not going to unite, and it's not going to serve any good purpose like, say, love would. Okay. It's a yin-yang thing. Second of all, being fearful and that descending into hate is just not very manly. It's not valid leadership, and it doesn't serve a positive, productive purpose. And we as men are supposed to build. We're supposed to lead. We're supposed to be agents for positive change. We're supposed to be the heroes, Frank, which is something you talk about all the time. And I want to hear your thoughts on all of that.
Well, what's interesting about fear is it's a growth out of ignorance. And that's true with sexism and racism, but it's true with so much of who we're trying to become, because we're going to be fearful of whatever's around us, whatever's in front of us. But to grow and to become who we want to become, you have to confront those fears. You have to directly go after them. So fear is actually something you grow past. It's when you lose the fear of something that you're doing, climbing, I'd like to run with the bulls, whatever you want to go and physically confront that helps you overcome that and grow. And then you realize what the rules are of that thing you're dealing with. And you find there's actually a structure there. And there's actually a code built into all that once you really start to think about it, you realize it's been there all along. And then you start to really get it. And it's important not to completely lose your fear in those situations, because you'll actually become much more vulnerable to making horrible mistakes in a fight or in a confrontation, or even just starting a business or whatever you're trying to endeavor to do in your life. You have to have a piece of that fear, and you've got to keep a piece of that fear. Don't completely let it aside, but don't let it control you. If it's controlling you, you're going to do some pretty bad things, maybe some dangerous things, and you're going to do some dumb things based on ignorance, like the sexism and racism. So yeah, you have to grow at any stage in your life. And this is true of a boy. I have an 8-year-old and I'm constantly doing this with him. Or I'm 48 and I'm still doing things that are pushing me out of my comfort zone to overcome this. I even got to interview G. Gordon Liddy once on this topic, who's famous for overcoming your fear to grow and become a man. And he said, he was surprised that he thought once he had overcome something, he'd no longer be afraid of it. But he found that it was actually a percent decrease, that every time he overcame it, it would decrease in fear by 10% until finally it got to be a small enough fear and he didn't have to worry about it anymore. But he knew it was always still there. I've always liked that viewpoint of looking at fear as we grow.
Liddy, man. A conservative commentator, for you guys who don't know much about his radio career, let alone what happened with him in Watergate. Of course, he went to jail as part of the Nixon administration and the Watergate thing, emerged from jail and became a conservative radio commentator who was perhaps best known for issuing a calendar every year with sexy women holding guns on it, which was just a phenomenon. Right, yeah. Liddy, man. My late Uncle Bob, who any of you guys who've been a part of my Unsettled program already know, was a huge fan of Liddy.
Well, I got to give one anecdote now that we're on the Liddy thing for a second. Because I actually backed him down. He came to my book party, one of my books, He came to the party, and I went and parked his car for him because at the time he's now a very old man. By the time I think he was 80, and his wife was still alive then. So I parked his car because there was no close parking, and I came back and I gave him his keys, and and okay, when it came time for him to leave the party, I said, "Mr. Lee, I have to go get your car for you. It's too far for you to go." And he said, "No, I'm going to get my own car." He was too tough. He wouldn't give me his keys, So there was an elevator in the place, and he gets on the elevator to go down to the first floor and leave, and I run down the stairs and stand there in front of the door, and he comes off the elevator with his wife in his arm, and they're walking to the door, and I said, "Mr. Liddy, you're not walking out of this door with those keys. I'm going to get your car." And he goes, "No, you're not. I'm going right through you." I said, "Mr. Liddy, I'm a lot younger than you. You might be a lot tougher than me, but I'm a lot younger than you, and I'm going to get those keys." And he laughed, and he handed me the keys, and his wife said, "No one's ever talked to G. Gordon like that." And I went and got his car, and he thanked me like a gentleman and got into it, and he left. And we always got along after that. But I'll never forget the day I got to back down G. Gordon Liddy.
Hey, man, game recognizes game, right?
He's a great example. He's a great man. He really is.
Yeah. A couple minutes ago, you talked about retaining a portion of fear and how that's probably good for you. It's in our best interest to retain a little bit of fear. And I'm reminded of an interview that may possibly be urban legend because I've never been able to locate the actual interview via Google, just hearsay associated with it. But apparently the late, great Ayrton Senna was interviewed. And of course, Ayrton Senna, the Brazilian Formula One driver, widely considered to be one of the greatest who ever lived, was asked, apparently by a journalist, how Formula One drivers can drive without fear in such a fearsome sport where men die when they make the wrong split-second decision. And the response that's attributed to Senna is, all of us are afraid all the time because a fearless Formula One driver is a dead Formula One driver. What we do is we take that fear and we harness it with courage. And as indirect as it is, I've always loved that definition of courage, which is facing the fear and doing it anyway. And Brene Brown and others have talked about that since. But all of us are going to feel fear. All of us are human. But there's a big difference between courage and cowardice. And it all has to do with a man's response to fear. So how does courage as opposed to cowardice relate to this current climate of fear-mongering, Frank?
Well, courage is just the ability to put that fear aside, not to envision yourself in this horrible situation. You're able to objectively stand back from it and still do the right thing. That's being courageous. And whether it's catastrophe, a fire happening, or you're saving somebody, or what have you. I mean, I saved a swimmer last year. A young girl's kayak flipped over and she was drowning. She didn't have a life jacket on, and there were 3 men next to me, and none of them jumped in the water. This is the one time in my life where I've done something heroic. I didn't even think. I was just in the water, and I went out there and I got her in. And later the other man asked me, "How did you do that? How did you possibly? I didn't even know it was happening, and you were already halfway out there." I just realized that I thought a lot about this, and I've just kind of prepared myself mentally to act without letting all these thoughts get in the way, and to have a mental awareness. I watched her when her kayak went over. I watched her. Can she swim? And I realized she can't swim. And I just went. And it surprised me that the other men didn't have that same reaction, but they just hadn't thought about it and acted in a heroic way in other parts of their life. They hadn't overcome and grown a certain part of themselves. I don't mean to just pat myself on the back, but you go through that kind of thing and you realize, wow, that actually did this because I did that. One thing does lead to another. And I don't know that I would always have that kind of reaction, but it's nice when you do, and it does take preparation and self-control.
I would argue that we as men are indeed hardwired to be heroes. It's inherent to our masculinity, but it's also a muscle one has to exercise lest it atrophies, right?
Oh, well put.
Yeah, I think a lot of guys just haven't practiced enough heroism in order for it to become unconscious competence, right?
Yeah, if you don't challenge yourself physically in some way, whatever it is, it could even be in tennis, but you're out there and you're pushing yourself physically, and you don't know what your body can do, and your body's not ready to respond with your mind. You're just going to fall into what do I do mode, which is, I think, where those men really were. And that's right, because you haven't acted. We're in the physical world. You can be intellectual about it all day long, and I am, but you also have to go out there and physically confront your body and the world you're in order to grow as the man you want to be.
Well, it all kind of comes back to Rudyard Kipling and his poem If, right? Can you keep your head when all about you are losing theirs? Interestingly enough, as you were talking just now, Frank, it occurred to me that that's not necessarily only a psychological thing. It's also a physical thing. You know, as everybody else is standing around wondering what to do, I not only keep my emotions calm, level-headed, but I know what to do. I am able to act instinctively as a result of my psychology being where it needs to be as a man. Brilliant.
Right. You're actually healthy. You're actually psychologically healthy is the way I would put that, because you are in tune with your body. Your mind is in tune with your body, and you're able to think and do the right thing. Like I did a book with a Green Beret, and I asked him about his training, and he was actually a trainer for a long time. He was badly wounded in Afghanistan. He'd been through a deep career there. And I asked him, how do you keep your head under fire? How do you possibly do that? And he said, look, it's training. You're falling back on all that preparation, and you just go into that mode where you're doing the right thing. You do have to think, and the special forces person does, you have to think all the time, because you're going to have to change the plan. The plan is going to go out the window as soon as those bullets start to fly, but you still have a basic rubric that you're following, and it's that training. And it's the same with being a man. You're training for that one eventual thing that'll happen. It's not even just that one eventual thing. As you meet people and speak to them, a man looks them in the eye and talks to them and shakes their hand and has his back straight. He behaves a certain way because he's trained himself to behave a certain way. Then other people respond to him as a strong guy, but a strong, compassionate guy with a good heart and so on, because he's acting like that, because that's who he's become and who he's grown himself up into.
And that's why those guys are heroes.
Right.
I mean, gentlemen, you cannot be a hero if you're surrendering to fear instead of facing it with courage. And if, in fact, you're searching out the fear-mongering so you can somehow feel comfortable in the midst of other people who are wallowing in that fear with you, basically, in my mind, Frank, that's akin to a guy who's sitting in his mommy's basement, unemployed, with Cheeto fingers, playing video games all day long instead of going out and making something of his life. It's just cheap entertainment to give in to fear like that. Because then you can blame someone else. Then there's no personal responsibility. It's always someone else's fault. And there's this whole syndromic effect associated with giving in to fear that really just destroys our manhood. It's deeper than a lot of guys give it credit for.
Right. We've just entered, we're in the middle of the year of fear-mongering. COVID, if you mention, wait a second, shouldn't we have a targeted approach now to COVID, where we're protecting the most vulnerable or the elderly and those with pre-existing conditions and so on, while the rest of us get back to work sensibly with all sorts of good, face mask wearing, just let's come up with a good plan for this stuff, but we can get back to our life. You're immediately attacked, as I have been when I brought this topic up with people who are living in fear. And they attack you, saying, how dare you? You're going to get people killed if you go out back into society and open a restaurant. And even with 6 feet between people and masks on and all the other protocols being followed, they're just so filled with fear over this thing when it's well past time, when we need a targeted approach, as I said, to protect the most vulnerable and get our economy going. I can't imagine the harm that is happening now to people out there because they've lost their jobs, because there may be child abuse going on, because they're in the home with on and on. When you talk to the people about this, that scares me actually. I more than the COVID actually scares me. So yeah, this is the year of fear, and I'm hoping after this election we'll break out of it, because I think a lot of it is being held down right now as an election issue.
I mean, gee, you think? And people will be in total denial of that. Like, so much of the crisis happening within 6 months of an election. But as John Belushi would say, but no, if it drives your narrative to claim it, it has nothing to do with it being an election year. I mean, you got to be kidding me. Look, Frank, all of us as guys know that guys who are fearful wussies are not attractive to women. Women love heroes. Women love men who stand up for what they believe is right. They have a cause. They have purpose. This is so freaking well documented in the annals of how to attract women that it doesn't even bear repeating. Yet, so many men think they can somehow get away with slipping into this fear-mongering mode, and it's going to serve them well, when it won't serve them well in any respect. It may even harm their careers ultimately. So let's talk practicalities here. Let's get real with these guys. What does a real man do right now, especially if he's looking to attract a good woman in his life or keep a good woman in his life for that matter? What are the practical ways men like you and me and other guys listening can take steps to, first of all, recognize fear-mongering for what it is, okay? And next, calibrate our mindsets so we're not entrapped by it.
Yeah, it's manly humor. No, there's a manly style of humor and confidence that needs to come out of you. That isn't just out of men. Like the other day, I took my son to soccer practice. They started soccer again. My son's 8 years old. And it was a real debate whether they were going to start the soccer thing or not. There's all these protocols. We're wearing masks, and the kids can take the masks off when they are actually playing. And we're keeping distances as much as possible. There's all this going on. But I talked to his coach. Her name is Sarah. And I said, I just wanted to thank you for doing this. I know there's a lot of debate about this. And she said, you wouldn't believe it, especially some of the men. They were so afraid of COVID. And then getting the kids together was going to cause this pandemic to just flare up in our town. All these bad things were going to happen that they didn't want to do it. We finally outvoted them, but just barely. I said, it was men who did it. She said, absolutely, it was men. She said, me and a couple of other mothers got together and we forced this issue through. We have to get the kids out there for their own psychology, their own physical natures. You know, the boys and girls on this team, they have to get out there and do this because it's just not healthy for them to keep staying indoors for so long. So it was the women who stood up to the men and said, be men, get your kids out there. You don't have to. Of course, they didn't forcing people to get kids out there, but it was these women. And I was so impressed. But it's that confidence. You're doing the right thing. You're following the protocols. You figured it out. That's manly as hell. Figure it out. What's the safest, best way to do this? Come up with a plan and enact that plan and do it with confidence, with boldness, with decency. Bring your team together as you do it. Listen to everybody, but be strong for them. The good ones in your group will rise up too and be strong right with you. And the women in that group will respect you and the other men will respect you. You'll be that strong, compassionate leader that you really should be.
Well, that's right on, of course. You started your response by talking about, once again, that warm levity, having a sense of humor, keeping your head when all about you are losing theirs. And then you kind of layered on top of that this fascinating idea of being willing to look past the narrative and decide as an independent thinking man that you're going to do what's right. My kids need exercise. My kids need community with other kids. They need to build up grit, determination, and self-confidence that team sports gives them. And that supersedes all the science about whether or not my kid's going to get sick and be seriously endangered by this COVID virus. And yet, some men can't rise above and speak for themselves because, again, they've given into the fear-mongering. Because the fear-mongering is going to always drive the narrative, whereas if we think for ourselves, it's going to drive what's good and right for those we love and who are trusting us to make good decisions as men. Isn't that true?
Oh, that's absolutely true. That manly confidence. I saw this once. I was a small-town journalist in Wyoming when this certain individual was very angry about an article that I'd wrote about him. And it was based on direct police reports and reporting. So it was all true, but he had a drunken rage and had done things that he shouldn't do. And he was arrested. And he was angry about the article. So he came into the press room drunk, started throwing things around, was angry. And I'm standing there behind the press thing thinking, okay, I'm going to have to protect the women who are back here, but I'm going to wait till he comes over the desk. I'm not going to go over the desk and fight with this guy and brawl with him. So I'm waiting there as a man should, just confident looking at him. And I'm pretty young. I'm 24. Somebody calls the police and this cop walks in. I thought, okay, now the cop's going to get into a fight with this guy and have to take him down. No, the cop stood there. He put his thumbs in his belt buckle. He looked at the guy and he laughed. And he said, Carl, what are you doing, man? Really, Carl? And the guy got embarrassed, this drunk guy. He looked at himself inwardly. He knew he just messed up all over again. And without even cuffs on him, he said, sorry, and bowed his head. And he walked out with this small town cop. Now, it's a small town kind of scene, but that was just manly as hell. The guy didn't engage him. He looked at him with humor, with love. He was ready to act, as a man should be. But he kept his composure. He kept his head when all about him were losing theirs.
Exactly. And that's an experienced law enforcement officer, for sure. And one of the good ones. I'll tell you, we as men, especially as young men, when we haven't quite evolved our level of wisdom and maturity to where it should be yet, and there's no crime in that. It takes a period of time living life skillfully to achieve that wisdom and maturity. It's so easy for so many guys to just get trapped just to get caught up. Someone says something that disrespects them. Someone says something that they go, no, that's so wrong. It needs to be corrected. I've got to respond to every Facebook post that disagrees with me. I got to set these people straight. When in reality, nobody's listening and nobody's minds are going to be changed. And I would encourage all you guys listening out there, one of the best ways not to get entrapped by the fear-mongering is just to choose your battles and realize you don't have to respond to everyone who's doing something silly. And one of the best ways to know when that's happening to you is for us to ask ourselves, is there something better I could be doing right now? Is this derailing me from a mission I should be accomplishing right now, other than being on Facebook, Twitter, or arguing with this lady at the supermarket about who's got a mask on and who doesn't? Is this dragging me down emotionally? Is this not a good look for my manhood? If you ask yourself those kind of questions before you respond to some of the negative fear-mongering that's going on out there, you're going to be able to rise above it and not respond to it. And I will throw this out on the table, Frank, and in closing, I'd like your opinion on this. When people are acting like 3-year-olds, when they're resorting to ad hominem, hateful name-calling and mudslinging, vis-a-vis having no real evidence to support even what they're hating even, two things are going on. First of all, they're acting like sheeple, because the first thing to know about someone who resorts to ad hominem vis-a-vis a debate is they have no idea why they believe what they believe. They're just knee-jerking. You're an idiot because you don't agree with me. There's no real debate to be had there. Second of all, there's no reasoning with people who are hateful and just want to start an argument. It isn't going to happen. So what's happened when people are too immature and too unreasonable to hold a meaningful conversation is they have forfeited their right to participate in the adult conversation. They are not one of the adults in the room. And I know we talked about that on a recent podcast, but it bears repeating here because it's such a powerful truth. You don't owe anyone who has forfeited their right to be in the adult conversation anything. And you're not some kind of wimp. You haven't been owned because they insulted you. You're doing the manly thing by just not getting drawn down into that quagmire. Because you know what stupid people do? We said it before, right? They drag you down to their level and beat you with experience. I'd love your thoughts on that.
Well, there's two important things to say about that. One, I'm a journalist, and I'll often have comments in the end of my articles, whether I'm writing for Fox or whatever.
I can see this coming.
Oh yeah, I let readers respond to the reader mostly. That's key. When I absolutely have to respond to an ad hominem attack, and I have to say something, a light humor, pointing out just how silly they're being, without getting nasty, not being snarky, and give them a link, give them somewhere to go, because what you're really not talking to them, you're talking to everybody else. Okay, so once you come in and make sure your response is perfect, because you only should do that once. It should not be a back and forth, and then drop it, let it go, let that person become whoever they're going to become. Because you have to realize part two of this is that everything you're saying is now a part of the public record. And if you want to get a job, you want to go to a certain school, you want to get into a certain relationship with somebody, all that stuff is searchable on Facebook, Twitter, whatever. It's out there. And they can find it potentially. I've not hired people because of what I've seen, what they've said on Facebook and so on. And that's not just me, that's common. I don't know how many girls I've talked to about this who say, look, I'm not going to go with this guy because I went and looked what he was saying on, or saw some photo of him on Instagram or whatever it was. And he just doesn't look manly to me. He doesn't look like a guy I really want to be around. So I don't trust him. So you have to realize every time you respond to one of those nut jobs out there, that you're creating a public record about yourself. And you want to show your best self. And you want to be out there and you want to be your best self and grow into that best self. And the only way to do that is to actually, do it. So no, you don't go down and sling mud.
Well, I echo every single thing you just said because it's so right on the money. Like you, I exist in a world where I have a lot of people who can hide behind the anonymity of the internet who wish to respond to me. And I have at this point, Frank, decided I'm only going to respond to angry, immature arguments when there's an untruth about me being floated. And I will, like you, correct that truth in a reasonable way and just let it sit there. And typically, if the person keeps ranting, they're going to get nowhere. And usually they back down. And what I will layer on top of what you just said is whenever someone's being unreasonable and silly or evil or petty or immature, look, you're not the only one noticing. I mean, there may be someone who piles on because whatever silliness they're engaging in drives their narrative also, and they're in agreement on it. But ultimately, people know who the adults in the room are. And you're only going to be an adult in said room if you can not get trapped by the fear-mongering and rise above. And let's bring it full circle. That's the kind of man who gets women. Show me a guy who's acting like a fear-mongering ninny anonymously in the comments, and I will bet you dollars to donuts, whatever that means, Frank, that guy's single, or he's not getting any from women. You know, he's not getting any attention from high-quality women.
Quality women. Yeah, you're not going to meet the right types if you're acting like a juvenile. They aren't going to be attracted to you. They're not going to be engaged by you. They're not going to find you manly and attractive. None of that's going to work unless you are those things. You have to be those things. Now, if you're acting like a juvenile, that's all you're going to attract.
Yeah, no question. His name is Frank Miniter, and he is a New York Times bestselling author of The Ultimate Man's Survival Guide and the editor-in-chief of America's First Freedom. And he tells it like it is, which is one of the things I love about him. And he also interviews presidents in the Oval Office. And you can find out more about him by heading over to a special URL that I've set up. That's www.mountaintoppodcast.com/Frank. There you will be able to get your hands on his books and perhaps subscribe to his magazine and get lots of other goodies from none other than Frank Miniter himself. I'm also going to add his book, The Ultimate Man's Survival Guide, and his newer book, The Ultimate Man's Survival Guide to the Workplace, onto my Amazon influencer page, which you can reach by going to mountaintoppodcast.com/Amazon. Frank, I had high expectations for this particular conversation, and my friend, once again, you've delivered. Thank you so much for joining us today and dropping your wisdom on these guys.
Thank you, Scott.
And gentlemen, let me tell you something. The guys over at Origin, Maine would be in lockstep with everything we've said today. I tell you that. Jocko Willink is running the show over there, who's a retired Navy SEAL. When you go to mountaintoppodcast.com/origin, ORIGIN, you're going to find boots and jeans and other apparel that are befitting of a real man who harnesses his fears and rises above it in a courageous manner. You're going to find BJJ gis for you guys who are into Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and supplements that not only fuel Jocko Willink himself, I mean, these are tried and true, they will fuel you to greatness too. It's all there for you at mountaintoppodcast.com/origin. If you have not re-upped your supply of Hero soap lately, I'll tell you what, you need to go do that right now. Hero's soap will make you smell like a man and give you that olfactory edge when you're out attracting women. Go to www.mountaintoppodcast.com/Hero soap to find out more about those guys. And here's a hint. Peppermint and cool is awesome. Go ahead and try that one. And as always, I do invite you to come to our website at mountaintoppodcast.com. You're going to be able to dig so deep, gentlemen, into how to get better with women, how to be the kind of man who attracts those women. Hey, look, you know what? For 15 years, I've been talking to you guys about not only how to get women, but to get quality women. And yet, nowadays, we've evolved. There's so much more going on. It's all about being a man of character who does right by the world and is truly a hero, not only to women, but to his fellow men. And I want to talk to you guys. I want to get on the phone with you guys for 25 minutes for free to talk about what's going on in your life, what the new normal, quote unquote, is going to look for you, and best of all, how you can rise above, be everything you're meant to be as a man, and get the right woman into your life. Let's talk, gentlemen. Go to www.mountaintoppodcast.com. Get on my calendar by clicking the red button in the upper right-hand corner. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes, And while you're there, sign up for the free X and Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.